Kia ora guys, Kristen Harper here, and welcome to my Leadership Through a Crisis series of conversations with some of New Zealand's top business leaders. And I'm absolutely humbled this morning to be talking with Sir Ray Avery. And Sir Ray is a pharmaceutical scientist, an inventor, a philanthropist, an author, and a social entrepreneur, just to name a few. Ray was also New Zealander of the Year and a Knight Grand Companion of New Zealand Order of Merit, just to name a few. Now, look, I'm not going to say too much more, and I'll get you to introduce yourself and a wee bit of your background, because you've just done and achieved so much in your lifetime, and I really wouldn't know where to start. So I'll let you get onto that, and then after that, mate, I'll ask you a few questions around the current state of play of what we're going through with this COVID-19 at the moment.
Well, I'll give you a CV, really, which has a reference to what we're talking about with the COVID-19. I was brought up in post-war Britain, and that's a very important thing because we'd come out of a 5-year war, and even 2 years after that war, people were having tins of stuff in their larder that they kept because they were used to having a sort of pandemic on their doorsteps. Even 5 years after that, what had happened was the labels had come off. Nobody knew what was in these tins, but they still kept them because, and that's the really important thing to remember about this pandemic, is that it will have an effect on our society and the way that we go forwards in the future. And I was brought up in orphanages in the UK, so I was challenged day one, and I had to be very resourceful, running away and living on the streets of London and making my own batteries and torches under the railway bridge to be able to read late at night. And through my life, I've had a variety of careers, and I've reinvented myself many times. So I started off as an agricultural research scientist, then I became a forensic scientist looking at how people committed suicide, and then I became a pharmaceutical scientist. Then I started building factories around the world, build hospitals, and also then, of course, we've done a lot of work in blindness. So by the time my youngest daughter is my age, there'll be about 100 million people who've got their sight back because of the factories we built, the technology that we put in place. And now, of course, we've got a low-cost infant incubator in production in India, and we've got nutritional products that we're rolling out to kids in New Zealand. I guess what's happened in my life is that I've worked out my dream when I was about 14 years old was to be a millionaire and be loved by as many women as possible, because I thought that would make me happy.
Thought that'd make you happy.
But it wasn't a total success. What I learned in the end was that to love people and look after people less fortunate made me happy. So that's what I've been doing for the last 30 years.
Awesome. Cool. And I guess with your background, I'd love to hear your take on this COVID-19, because I think compared to most people, you're probably better, well qualified. It's definitely so much uncertainty in our lives right now, and we're 3 weeks into the lockdown. So, mate, what is your whole take on this?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to look at history. We're a very successful species. We've gone through a whole lot of different challenges in our life. In 1918, the Spanish flu killed 20 million people in 2 years. It was, and people don't kind of relate to that in the sense that we've had a long period of time where we haven't had any pandemics, but we survived that, and that's the important thing to start understanding now, that we will survive this particular thing. The other thing is that we don't really understand the epidemiology of the disease and the vast differences between some countries and others. There's about 90 countries around the world that really haven't been touched by the virus at all. They've got people infected, they've got better. You've got countries like Hong Kong, and Hong Kong, if they haven't flattened the curve, they've decimated it. They've only had one death, I think, or I'm not even sure it's one death. And so go and have a look at the stats. There's the thing called World Meter. Go in every day, they update. And I invite everybody to go into World Meter and see what's going on. And so the problem that we had in the New Zealand context was we got a bunch of statisticians to tell us that we're all going to die, that there's going to be 80,000 people at least die if we followed the metrics that we accrued through countries like Spain and Italy and the UK. And there's a whole number of reasons we shouldn't do that, because they've got quite different demographics and quite different population densities. So, for instance, in New York, they've got 11,000 people per square kilometre. In Kaitaia, I think it's about 15 people. The whole of New Zealand, it's about 18 people.
Yeah.
And so when you're talking about social distancing, there's quite different paradigms that come into play. So the metrics were wrong in terms of, are we all going to die? Australia, for instance, if you look at Australia now, they're actually flattening the curve much faster than us. They're 40% cases that have been resolved versus our 20% of cases. So, and they've done all that without a lockdown.
What do you think that is?
Well, they're Australians for a start. You can't stop the mongrels from doing shit, you know. I've got my wife is a Greek Australian, so I spend half my time in Australia with the Greek family, and you can't stop the Greeks from going out. You know, right now they're going across the road with carrying, women in black dresses are carrying all sorts of shit and food and looking after each other. So my take is that when we do anything in life, this is the big business thing. Every decision that I make about a business is done on a system called failure mode cause risk analysis. And that looks everything around what could go wrong, basically, and then coming up with a mitigation strategy. And I think where we failed a bit is to look at the true cost of a total lockdown in terms of, I mean, I'm one of the reasons when I said, you know, to earlier, I'm sort of happy and unhappy. One of the things I'm unhappy about is that we do a lot of work in the social space in New Zealand. So we give our free Amigo bars to young kids in the places where, you know, women are actually holed up because of domestic violence. So there's a lot of groups around New Zealand. Those kids need help. So we've been delivering free Amigo bars to them. Because this is a pre-prepared food, we're not considered to be an essential service. So we can't actually deliver the food to these kids. On the other side of the coin, we do a lot of work through my company, Jupil, which we monitor the aged care people 24/7. Some of them have got Jupil watches and some have got mobile phone apps. But we can see what's happening to these little old ladies in their current situation. And typically, we would watch Aunt Maud or Margaret, all her family's died, and she's now holed up in this room, and they drop the food off at her door and knock and run away. She sees nobody. And what we've seen is that these women just don't get out of bed. You know, and so they're actually probably going to die of loneliness. They've got nobody to talk to. We try and ping them and to see if they, you know, need any help. But the wording that we get from them is that they're just lonely and depressed, and they see no future. So that wasn't programmed into the equation. And then you've got timing. So, for instance, if we do go to a semi-lockdown, and now we can have Kentucky Fried Chicken takeaway, you drive through. There wasn't really any difference in terms of social distancing before we had the lockdown, in the sense there's no risk transferring the disease, but from a bag to the people. So we need to get some serious science around how we manage the pandemic. And I think from a leadership perspective, what a leader is, and from a scientific perspective, is somebody who espouses the hopes and dreams of a society at a particular time in history. And that's the important thing to understand. What you should be doing as a leader is espousing the hopes and dreams of the whole society, what they want, rather than we're almost moving into a dictatorship where we're told all to, you know, stay in our homes and not do anything. And I think that's a real issue for me in terms of whenever I've taken leadership roles. I'll give you a couple of examples about leadership. I was in Eritrea at the end of the 30-year War of Independence. The MiG started to come over and bomb everything. Everybody bowed out of town, the United Nations, all the other aid organisations. And I was there with a bunch of technicians building a factory. And I said to the guys, what should we do? Should we drive out over land through the Sudan? Or everybody's bailing out on these Mercy flights? Or should we stay here and finish the job? And these were all Australians and New Zealand technicians. And they said, fuck it, we'll just stay here.
We'll just do
it. But the point about being a good leader is you ask the people. And you get your team to believe in the idea of what you're trying to do. And you resonate what the community is feeling. And I'm not sure that we've got that particular leadership at the moment. And one of the crucial things for me is, and it's very important with language, Jacinda Ardern wants to eradicate the COVID virus in New Zealand. Now, she does that. I mean, she's doing, even Trump hasn't gone that mad. The only infectious disease we've ever got rid of in the whole of the world since we came out of the primordial soup of the sea is smallpox. It's the only one. You cannot eradicate this disease. And if you focus on doing that and getting down to zero, we'll all be bankrupt and dead. We don't want that. What we have to do is do what we've done with the flu. we've learned to live with the flu. Each year we accept that 500 of our little people are going to die.
Mm.
But nobody's tracking that. And nobody's shut down the economy because 500 people will die anyway because of flu. What we've learned to do is to flatten the curve to an acceptable level. We'll accept 500 people dying. But if I said to you today that 500 people who know COVID-19 would all go, oh, and it's got a kind of cult status of its own, and it's based on other countries' problems, but we don't really have.
And it's interesting because there's different leadership coming out of different countries, and everybody's sort of treating it in a different way. And you made sort of one comment there about, was it Trump not being there? But it's interesting how, I guess, it's perceived, because I think sometimes you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't, right?
Well, of course, that's the big dilemma, and of course that often drives the decision-making process.
Mm.
So you're not focusing on solving the problem, but what would people say if you made the wrong decision?
Yeah.
And they're quite two different paradigms. One of them is trying to solve the solution, and the other one is covering your ass in case. So one would argue that if you shut down everything, you've done everything to prevent the disease spreading. And if it doesn't spread, then you've succeeded. But if it didn't spread anyway, you still can say that you succeeded. So, that's the safe thing to do. But at the other end of the scale, there will come a time, I call it the Churchill effect. When Churchill was in power in the UK, we had the V sign and we all believed in and I see so many parallels with the propaganda that's on the television. Every time I turn on, we've got a COVID thing and a COVID stay safe. And we're going to make an island nation. There's a lot of uncomfortableness that I have. One of the brightest things that happened to me in all of this was some girls from Dio, just before the lockdown, did a race around Cornwall Park and raised $3,000 for a hospital in one of the African countries to get an amigo bars to them.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to see. I want to see us not go into a Trump kind of country where we've got so much rhetoric around 5 million people can eradicate this disease, and we can, Susie Wilkes said, we can lock up our borders and watch the rest of the world burn.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the country we want to be. I think we want to be a country that's inspiring to the rest of the world.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, because the media does sort of perpetuate that sort of that doom and gloom, that negativity. And even when we watch 3 News, and I was saying to my partner the other day, I said they have the same shit coming up every day. At the very start of it, they show the disease and all that, and I just think it brings that negative connotation. I think we've just got to change that narrative, because it's quite hard to get out of that whole sort of thinking of it, all this doom and gloom with all that stuff constantly in your face. And we'll just really turn the TV off and just keep music on.
It's a good idea, because you can make your own world and your own life, and I do mine by going out in the garden and doing a bit of gardening just to get a bit of mindfulness. But I'm encouraged by the fact that looking at history, that we are survivors, we're natural innovators, and I tend to look at what comes out of, I'm an amateur social anthropologist, so I look at what industries thrive at different times. So when we invented the motor car, we could drive long distances. The problem with that was we needed somewhere to stay. So that started the motel industry in the USA, particularly because there they needed somewhere to stay, and then they had the takeaways associated with that. So a whole industry. And of course, with Route 66 closing down and big motorways, all of those businesses went to the wall and went bankrupt. But people adapted. And what they did, because following the big depression, which we're almost going to go into now, and I'm thinking of my mates at Juicy. Now, Juicy, a good example of great company, really sexy guys. They built up the company from 300 vehicles to 3,000, hotels, boats, absolute success. All munted now because of the shutdown, all munted.
Yeah.
But if they take a leaf out of the book of, say, that American recession, what happened there? There were no trailer parks before the recession, but they realised people needed cheap accommodation. So you can almost imagine that Juicy could put all their vans into an area and have a common service area, and they can actually get some revenue by changing their model. And it's that adaptiveness. There's a wonderful TV program in the UK called Only Fools and Horses, and this guy bought a whole lot of Second World War tin pineapples, and they got them, and all the labels were off, and they were going to have to relabel them. And when they opened them up, they were fermented. They just exploded. So technically, he was fucked. But the reality was, he just looked and said, "Fruito Fizz. we're selling this Fruito Fizz," and that's what you need to do. That's the attitude of resilience that we're going to have to draw on It can only get better from now on.
It's that creativity, and actually Mike Hutchinson and I were just talking about that creativity sort of coming out of this, and over this time, it's just using this time, I guess, to be a bit more creative, be a bit more mindful, and then look at how you can use this as an opportunity. Because it's really hard at the moment. There's going to be a lot of people that are losing their jobs, and that shit is just getting really hard. But then on the other side of it's, how do I take this and then use it as an opportunity? And that's the, I think, that's the thing right now, just to try and, I guess, change that narrative. How do you think this will change our country? Based on that, a lot of our industries now are really just stopping, especially around the hospitality, around tourism.
Well, and this is the part of the algorithm that I don't think the government foresaw or thought through. A good example is I go to a local cafe up in Mount Eden for my morning Java, and it's great, and they know me, and by the time I get to the counter, they've all made the coffee, and they're now completely closed. And when I'm in Sydney and I go to a little bistro down the road to do the same thing, they're actually open right now in terms of takeaways. And so what I heard from that guy was that, look, we're down, our takings are down 50%, but we can live through this. Whereas if we go another 2 weeks, the guy in that even said, I can't open again. And that's just a small change in metric that would have allowed them to survive. And this is despite any government subsidy. It's just the logistics of not being able to serve people coffee. And so there's going to be a much more logarithmic change. People are talking about 30% business failing, but it could be as high as 50%, because everybody's interconnected in the service industries that they provide. And so for the sake of just some small bits of flexibility about allowing, we've got to look at how the disease is transmitted. We know that if you get a whole bunch of people together having a piss-up party at a wedding, and there's all these people in a small room all producing 50,000 particles a minute of dead skin cells and bacteria and yeast and mold if they're women, it's not going to have dirty people. and the bacteria can spread, and the viruses can spread in that environment. But if you're out in the open and you're going to the supermarket, and you're got social distancing, the chance of you getting infected is probably quite low. So there's got to be some good science. And I'm talking about good science. What happened was, one of the big important messages I'd like to get across about leadership is that leadership is an inclusive process and a transparent process, because otherwise it's a dictatorship. So we want people to be inclusive. And so right now, we've got no communication with the government about some of the implementation strategies that would probably work for improving healthcare outcomes. A good example of that was Rob Fife got in the room with Sam Morgan and a bunch of other people and decided that they would import a whole lot of ventilators, because what they knew, of course, was from the media that people were dying because they didn't have enough ventilators. So they rushed in and did that. What they didn't know, because they have no medical knowledge, is that ventilators are actually one of the causes of the deaths. 80 to 90% of people who got put ventilators are actually very, very complicated machines. They have to put you under an anaesthetic to start. Then they put a big tube down your throat. What happens is 80 to 90% of people get ventilator-acquired pneumonia as a result of that treatment. What they've done now in Canada and what they've done in the US and the UK is they now have standard operating procedures to not use ventilators, because they get better results from sitting the patient half up and sticking some tubes up their nose with oxygen. So this is where you get kind of enthusiastic amateurs trying to do some good, but because they don't engage the whole scientific community, you can end up with something that's far worse. So those incubators are more likely to kill people than save people's lives.
And this is what you don't hear. And do you think that they have spoken much with the scientific community around this?
No, I offered to help, particularly with the purchase of protective clothing. I've spent the last 2 years building plants and making sure we didn't infect the products we're making, like lenses, or whether it's ear grommets or heart valves. And so we've learned how to protect the products, and also the people in hospitals, like cancer hospitals in Nepal and children's hospitals. We've built plants in Singapore and hospital negative containment rooms. So we know more about bacterial infections than anybody else. And we offered our help and nothing was forthcoming. And that's why there's no transparency. The same thing's been true for all of the monitoring issues. I know there's been a big cry from the big IT companies about solutions for tracking and tracing, and they've all just fallen into some void. We have no idea what's going on. We know, and there's no transparency from the government. Normally, there would be a specification from the government and a tender offered, and we would know what's happening, but we have no idea what's happening, and that's very worrisome.
That is pretty worrisome, because I would have thought that first people they would have spoken to would have been the people that know shit.
Yeah, well, that's right. That's right. I mean, well, you don't get somebody who started a second-hand company to start selecting the personal protective equipment and the ventilators for people. You know, you go to the doctors I mean, right now that we've got a campaign, as you probably know, which is brought to me. I used to be the chair of the New Zealand Health Innovation Hub, which represented all of the DHBs throughout the country.
Yes.
And we were trying to work out how we could reduce our terrible hospital infection rates. Remarkably, we've got the second highest infection rate acquired in hospitals than any other country in the world.
Wow.
You know, it's amazing. You know, even worse than some of the developing countries, in fact. You're more likely to get sick in a hospital in Auckland than you are in, say, New York.
Why is that?
Well, there's a number of reasons. One is that most of our hospitals are not fit for purpose, and that we know that Middlemore's full of mould and hasn't been refurbished.
It's an old hospital.
They're old hospitals, the provincial hospitals, and also they don't have the right air conditioning systems. But just as importantly, we're seeing all of the 30% of the last infections that we saw with the virus were in frontline nursing staff and caregivers. And that's because they weren't wearing the right material. When you have somebody in a proper HAZChem suit and glasses on, you're not only protecting yourself, but you're protecting the patient from being infected by you. And when you have one nurse going to a series of patients, and even the type of material that you use in your HAZChem suit can make the difference between life and death. Yeah. And this is all technical stuff. I've spent 30 years learning this shit, but nobody picked up the phone and asked me, even though we offered. That's worrisome. That's worrisome. So we have all of this. And of course, everybody goes now into defensive mode. We've asked the government for the specifications. The other thing is, we know this from what's gone on in Europe. A lot of material was purchased out of China. It was not fit for purpose, whether it be test kits or whether it be the actual...
I saw that on Vice News this morning. I was watching that and saying that everything that they got in, because since the States has pulled out of the World Health Organization, China stepped up and they've been sending a lot of stuff around the world, but a lot of the stuff has been inadequate. Either hasn't worked, you know, the respirators haven't worked, a lot of the PPE equipment hasn't...
That's right.
Been up to standard.
So I'm ready, you know, everything I do every day is to look after the little people. And the nurses are saying to me, despite what the government's saying and the Director of Health is saying, they haven't got frontline protection. They're being actually told not to wear it because they want to save it until it's needed. And, you know, that's absolutely a breach of the Health and Safety Act. You know,
save it until it's needed. It works in a pandemic, and they're saying save it till you need it.
Well, again, we don't know what they've purchased. They've got a plane load of stuff with our gut mates at zero, and they brought in this stuff, but we don't know what it is, and the government won't tell us. And that's not a good transparency. And we're seeing that at the other political level, where the opposition parties have asked the government to show them what was the decision-making tree for the total shutdown. What was the process that they applied? And the government's refused.
Wow.
And if there's no, you know, why would you not disclose that, you know? So I'm very worried we're moving into, and because the other style of things that's changing, because again, I'm an amateur social anthropologist, we've moved from, in a matter of weeks, we've moved from what was a political, party-driven process whereby everybody had a say, the opposition had a say, and the ruling party had a say, to what is more like a presidential style government. Yeah. So you've got Jacinda there and the big propaganda machine processing everything. And there was one scientist who popped up and disagreed with, or a bunch of scientists that popped up and disagreed with the lockdown. And one other scientist wrote and said, they shouldn't disagree with the government. Now, the last time I checked, it was social democracy, and you should also have good
disagree with the government.
Well, yeah, that's right. You shouldn't disagree with the government, and so that's worrisome to me as a kind of mindset. You know, I think scientific debate is a bloody good thing. You know, scientists will often disagree, but I think
because they'll base a lot of their decisions on fact.
Well, yes, but again, you know, there's what I love about democracy is there's a whole bunch of people who still have a flat Earth society, and I love them to bits because they're completely mad. But they'll need to have their say. And I would like to have my say in respect to the government and say, look, I've got a great deal of knowledge base that I can help you to get the right equipment. And what I've learned over the last years about preventing infections in hospital is very valuable knowledge. Put me in the tent and I'm here to help, and I'll do it absolutely for free. Probably be more valuable than throwing a whole lot of money at ventilators, which are actually going to kill some people.
Yeah. Oh, well, mate, this has been enlightening. Mate, before we go, what advice would you give to other leaders around the country as we head into week 4? What advice would you give?
Well,
it's a bit of a loaded question, but I know.
Yeah. Well, the advice that I would give is to I think whenever I've been challenged to make decisions, I've always had an algorithm that's behind me that goes back years. And one of the things is I've learned not to panic.
Yeah.
You know, the bombs go off around you and whatever happens. And I've lived through that. I've lived through the Depression following on from the Second World War. And I've lived through being abused for the first 14 years of my life. And I take great comfort from the beautiful things in life. So every day when I get up, for instance, and I go for a shower, I'm probably the most excited person in the world to know the benefits of having a clean shower on your own every day, because for the first 14 years that never happened. So I take little bits of beauty from knowing how lucky we are. And I think that in New Zealand we've got a beautiful country, and I think generally we care about each other. We're isolated, and that's given us a degree of natural protection. But we shouldn't isolate ourselves from the rest of the world in our thinking. I think we can show the world that we are clever and we are innovative. It's going to take a long time. Nelson Mandela was in prison for many, many years, and his advice in these situations was, don't think about tomorrow and exactly when you're going to get out, but just know that you will.
Yeah.
And that's the advice I would give. So don't panic. Talk to each other. Maybe there might be a reset of our society, which might be even beneficial when you think about the companies that are surviving and thriving right now are the things that are involved in primary issues relating to our health and well-being, our food supplies, our medical supplies, and the home and rest care industries and so on. And so maybe that's the reset when we all mortgaged our houses to buy the next house, car, and go on holiday to Bali. Maybe we get a reset that says what's important, and maybe we're seeing a little bit of that in the streets with people waving to each other and and so on. But don't give in. I mean, my final advice would be, I've only been successful in life because I never bloody give in. I never give in. Failure is only a cul-de-sac on the way to success.
All those the little roadblocks on the way to success. So Sir Ray Avery, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this conversation, mate, and we'll speak again soon. Thank you.
Take care, mate. Have a great day.
You too.